Chapter 13. In Black and White. Canada prides itself on being a nation of tolerance and acceptance. Unlike the great melting pot to the south, the true north strong and free is a polyglot, pluralistic mosaic in which all are welcome and differences are to be celebrated and preserved. It was not always thus. In 1896 Canada was unfathomably, unrecognizably racist. The country, a mere 28 years old, had already weathered a turbulent and troubled history. During their formative years, the maritime provinces had witnessed the expulsion of the Acadians and the systematic denigration of its First Nations peoples. Many had known slavery to be legal in their lifetime. Halifax, the region's capital and one of the principal gateways to the New World, funneled an endless stream of cultures, creeds, and languages through its port and expelled them into the less than welcoming arms of those eking out a living in the lands and waters beyond. Clashes verging on race wars were inevitable. Political correctness is of relatively recent invention. By today's standards, the rhetoric of 1896 seems staggeringly offensive. Aboriginals were consistently identified in the press as Indians, as though the inaccurate moniker alone was sufficient information. In English-speaking tabloids, the French were simply that, the French, deserving of neither surname nor respect. Stereotypes balanced precariously atop popular notions of phenotypes. Physical features were liberally used to define everything, including one's race, ethnicity, religion, nationality, or class. Xenophobia, mixed with more than a dash of prejudice, dictated that the European somatotype was the de facto pinnacle of beauty and desirability. Such conceits were so firmly entrenched that a report in the Bridgetown Monitor claiming that the civilizees of Japan were straightening their eyes to appear more white was not met with shock or disbelief but rather the tacit approval of its readership. Indeed, many saw God's guiding hand in the notion that the Japanese had become so progressive in their ideas and so set in their determination to get a position in the van of Caucasian civilization that they resorted to surgically mutilating their eyes. With blind faith came blind trust and the paper's myopic subscribers accepted the story as gospel, no matter how preposterous the reporting. The Monitor concluded its article by noting that post-op, the Jap arises from the surgeon's chair a happy man, for his eyes are as straight as those of any white man that walks the earth. The maritime broadsheets were striped with endless variations on this theme throughout the late 1800s. The influence of such diatribes was so pervasive it is best characterized as casual racism. Bigotry, and the hatred and fear it fomented, was so ubiquitous and unchallenged, it seemed almost an afterthought, the undetected background hum of daily life. Yet, without question, the hum grew louder and more menacing whenever the subject turned to those of darker pigmentation. The distinct physiognomy of African-derived populations both fascinated and repelled their Caucasian brethren. Postulating theories as to the origins of black traits became a kind of parlor game, one the local papers were only too happy to play. It is evident that it is the outdoor exposure of the African working classes that makes their skin so black, argued one armchair anthropologist, who went on to suggest that the phenomenon was not exclusive to humans but was seen in all African birds, beasts, fish, reptiles and plants. Such exposure, he contended, resulted in the Negro's curly hair. It is a protection to the brain from the tropical sun, concluding that the skull of the African, with its peculiar thickness, affords another feature of protection. Whites who found thick-headedness a mark of African inferiority were a textbook case of the pot calling the kettle black, but there was no denying that such physical traits automatically conveyed second-class citizenship to those who bore them, regardless of their point of origin. Expressions of racial intolerance were not limited to narrow-minded speculation as to the evolutionary benefits of the Afro. Although the abolition of slavery in 1832 had freed them from their literal shackles, blacks were still viewed as property by their fair-skinned neighbors. This ethos was on full display on February 21, 1896, when the Digby Weekly Courier ran a front-page story entitled "Three Popular Blacks, They Belong to the Diamond Family." The Negroes in question were damned with the faintest of praise as blacks we like, the implication being that all others left something to be desired. It was truly a different time, with the requisite different mindset. Casual racism was the social norm, the lesser of two evils. Commentary on skin color and ethnicity was not couched in the language of acceptance or diversity. Stereotypes were embraced, cherished, and freely applied. Straw-man arguments, such as chalking up questionable sentiments to unnamed sources, rendered untraceable by disclaimers such as "some think or they say," insulated editors from any charges of overt racism, although such precautions seemed unnecessary. Few in the reading audience were likely to complain. Into this volatile milieu stepped Peter Wheeler, a dark-skinned man of ambiguous ancestry and indeterminate parentage. When queried during the 1891 census, Wheeler identified his birthplace as Australia, a curious deviation from the correct answer, the island of Mauritius. It may have been an act of self-preservation, as Wheeler, better than anyone, understood the prejudice inherent in being African-born. To further his cause, Peter took pains to inform the census taker that his parents were born in England, affording him European heritage by proxy. Wheeler later repeated his contrived Australian genealogy during the coroner's inquest, much to the open disdain of the media. Run through the tabloid presses, Wheeler's right to revise his own history as a hedge against racism was pummeled into further proof of his murderous nature. In the process, reporters revealed their own ignorance of the world's bountiful ethnicities and phenotypes. The Morning Chronicle branded Wheeler a liar, stating, "Peter says he is an Australian but he is more probably a Spaniard or Portuguese." The Digby Courier echoed the sentiment, writing, "He is a foreigner, evidently a Spaniard, but claims to be a native of Australia." The Bridgetown Monitor dismissed Peter's Australian heritage altogether, declaring, "The man Wheeler has the appearance of a Spaniard or Portuguese and is described as short, thick-set and of a mulatto color, with unprepossessing countenance." The Globe, the precursor to today's National Globe and Mail, cut to the chase, describing Wheeler as the Portuguese who discovered the remains. That all swarthy men were labeled as Spaniards or Portuguese spoke volumes as to the insular nature of the region. Wading into the shark-infested deep end of the great Wheeler ethnicity debate, the St. John Daily Record somehow managed to simultaneously offend and half-heartedly commend the accused man when the paper reported he was generally looked upon as a half-breed but in no particular is he thought to be of the animal stamp. Peter spoke with an unplaceable, untraceable accent, which only compounded the problem and rendered him all the more incomprehensible to his homogeneous neighbors. If the local media were to be believed, not only had Peter Wheeler killed Annie Kempton, he had also committed the unforgivable sin of being dark-skinned, woolly-haired, and foreign-born. To hammer home the point, a number of papers, including the Digby Courier and the Bridgetown Monitor, commissioned a line art depiction of Peter Wheeler. In an eerie precursor of the infamous O.J. Simpson Time magazine cover that outraged a nation 1 century later, Wheeler's face and hair were altered to make him appear much blacker than he actually was.